So this is the SharePoint Evolution and SharePoint role whiteboarding session. So really what we're looking to do today is to prepare the sourcing team to better prepare them with the SharePoint roles that would be sourcing for. But really, before we can talk about that, and I intend to talk about all the roles that we use on SharePoint projects and the roles you guys would be looking for, but to really understand why those roles are important and the roles of the roles within the projects is to really talk about SharePoint in general and kind of how we got to where we are today and why. So, kind of an interesting story about Bill Gates. When he was running Microsoft and he had to come up with the next new idea, he actually would go and seclude himself in, developer fashion and think for a month or two about what is the next big thing that people need to do. So after Office was very mature and the Office toolset was very mature, what he did that. He went back and he said, okay, what is the next big thing? What do we need to do to further this concept of office productivity, etc.? So what he did is he came to the conclusion that although they have a great tool set for an individual worker in a silo to do word processing, financials through Excel, and forms through InfoPath, that went great. The problem came up when you actually tried to share that information. So if you actually had to share it, you did one of two things. You either attach that document to an email, send it to your colleague and said, what do you think? They may edit it and adjust it and send it back. And so then you'd have all these versions sitting around there, all the while your email boxes were getting full, and it just created this nightmare. Or you would upload it to a file share and say, go here and send them the link. Well, then you had another set of problems, which was when one person was opening that document, another person wouldn't be able to even see it because you'd get that infamous, this has been locked by this user, you have to pick up the phone, call them, or send them an email and say, I need this document. And even then, on the file share model, you wouldn't have these different versions of these documents that would be sitting out there. So what Gates came up with was, he said, okay, we do well with documents, but we really have a problem with collaboration, we really have a problem with sharing. We really don't have a point at which we can share documents. So SharePoint is born. So from this sabbatical and through the process of product development, they came up with what is called, and pardon my penmanship in advance, they came up with what's called SharePoint Team Services. STS, and that was in 2003. So this was a very revolutionary product, because now what you were able to do is, as a server product, introduce into the enterprise an environment where you could upload documents and send a link out to the team, and now everyone within the team can look at the same document at the same time. And I don't want to undercut the value of that, because now what used to take possibly 10 times as long for all 10 members to view the document, now they can all do it at the same time and collaborate on that document and come up with the final version much more quickly. Now still, you can only have one person edit at a time, but now you're able to see all the versions of all the edits as well. So there was a lot more to the product than that, but that was the major value proposition, to be able to collaborate and share that information all at the same location. And so now you really start to see a lot of productivity gains, and now the companies were starting to pay attention. So much so that at this point, a lot of companies replaced their current intranet at the time with SharePoint because it was that powerful. And so that went along, and a lot of people got excited, and a few years goes by. So Gates goes away again. He thinks about, okay, now what's the next thing with this concept of sharing information? And he realized that it was just that. it was, whereas STS was really good at sharing documents, the real power would be sharing information within the enterprise. And so he said, okay, we need to make this much bigger, much bigger. And so when he came back, he had this idea that became our Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007, also known as MOS. Now, the point I want to stress here is from here to here was really a new product set. Even though it was an extension of the concept of sharing information, this is a brand new product. And so much so that really the capabilities needed to fully manage this really exploded. And we'll take a look at that here in a bit. But just talk a little bit about this. So if we're going from document content to all information, we need to bring in some tools and some other capabilities. Well, at the time, Microsoft had this product called CMS, Content Management Server. 2003, I believe. I'm not entirely certain on that one. But Content Management Server. The purpose of this product was to manage web content. So you create web pages, create websites, create your intranet, even some intranet sites. That was that concept. But it kind of sat to the side, and you had your designers and your HTML gurus and those guys managing this stuff, and allowed you to had a publishing capability, and I believe it also had workflow inside there. So that's really where web content was managed at that time, or the product in which web content was managed. Now, STS, as we've talked about, let us manage documents as well. So what they did, instead of reinventing the wheel, they effectively took this product, Microsoft took this product, added it to the STS capabilities, and made that as part of our MOS product. So now with all of the web content management capabilities within CMS, you've just exploded your capabilities. Because one of the biggest issues with STS was that, it's great, but it looks kind of kludge. I wouldn't want to present this in front of a client per se, or I wouldn't want to present it in front of the world, because to really make it look good took a lot of work. But now with the introduction of CMS into the product suite, now you can bring your designers in, now you can bring your look and feel people in, now you can bring that in. So in addition to our web content and our document management, they also brought in a lot of great capabilities around records management. Now, records management, tightly related to document management, is where we know there are certain documents that are very important to an organization, and there are rules around how long you need to keep these documents and when you need to dispose of them. Using the file cabinet model, this is where you would keep a document for 7 years, take the file out, and shred it. Same happens with electronic documents. You need to keep them around for legal purposes and then make sure it's nowhere in the organization for litigation purposes. And so I bring up records management because with document management, web content management, and records management, this is what I call the 3 pillars of content management within SharePoint. And so really, you can describe most of the information that you would be managing within SharePoint within one of these 3 pillars. And as you can start to see, and we're going to talk about this here in a second, but you can start to see there are some definite different roles that are starting to emerge here. I mean, you have your look and feel people within your web content. You may have your BAs and your legal-minded folks in records management. And then, of course, our document management individuals as well. And so that was, once again, just a revolutionary way of coming about this, because now, in addition to being able to manage our web content, we can bring in all of this and intermingle everything together. So within your web pages, you can bring in the most recent version of your documents that we've already collaborated on from the value of our STS. So they didn't stop there. So they added a whole bunch of other capabilities in the spirit of sharing all information for an organization. So within that, we also have our, the concept of our web forms. We have our concept of BI, or business intelligence. We have a concept of some certain services around Office product, like Excel services, and InfoPath, once again with the forms. So the concept is any information that gets distributed within an organization can then be represented with this new product. And that's why I really say the jump from here to here is really a new product set. And so, and the skills needed to fully manage this entire system from soup to nuts takes many different skills, some conflicting, some not. Once again, we'll talk about that here in a second. Now to contrast, so that's MOS, right? Big, big deal. To contrast where we are today is SharePoint 2010. This, on the other hand, is a true next version. It's a true upgrade. This entire platform that you build on is the platform that SharePoint 2010 is built on. And so, I mean, and that's important to understand, especially from a sourcing perspective. Because, you know, if someone in the, you know, when MOS came out, if someone said, I can do MOS because I was a guru in STS, that wasn't necessarily the truth, because there's a lot of different skill sets needed to fully manage this from soup to nuts. They may be able to manage the document management piece, but there would be definitely a curve to get them fully up to speed across the entire spectrum. Here, if they were really good here, they will be pretty good here. I mean, there may be a little bit of learning up, but it's going to be a much smaller curve than from here to here. So that's really the point here. But just for completeness sake, what do we get with SharePoint 2010 that we didn't get with MOS? There's some look and feel aspects. You know, the concept of Silverlight allows us to do a lot more, allow our sites to have a lot more pop. From our developer's perspective, it's a lot easier to develop to SharePoint 2010 than otherwise. From a design perspective and how we administer SharePoint 2010, it is a lot more straightforward than MOS. But once again, from my vantage point, nothing really revolutionary from that perspective. Okay, so that's basically the evolution of how we got to where we are here. And really the one thing I want to take, the big takeaway here is the big bloat of roles and responsibilities that we got once we introduced the entire stack with MOS. Okay. Cool? Any? Make sense? Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about, let's go into the roles a little bit. So we've done this a few times, and so we always come back to one analogy that seems to work well. So I wanted to lead with that. And it's really the analogy of a house. And what I wanted to talk about is, you know, if we think about how we build a house, we move into the house, and then just general maintenance of the house, there's a lot of parallels with the roles that go to SharePoint. So let me just talk about this analogy, and then we'll talk about that parallelism. So at the very beginning, at the top of the pecking order, whenever we're building a house, there is our architect. Now, this architect's job is to, whether or not he or she is building a house that's going to be reproduced and replicated, you know, with like a master plan community, or whether or not it's a very custom house for a very specific client. Their job is to take those needs, take the limitations that they know of by being the architect of, by architecting many homes in the past, and put together the plans for the build out. And so that's their job, and they're the ones that are going to be, you know, with the drafting tables and all that. Now, they don't do that alone, but they need to understand every aspect of home building and the implications of doing one thing on another. So that's the architect. Now, the next person that's right next to him, that's probably the second, in my opinion, probably the second most important person, is their structural engineer. Now, the structural engineer's job is to make sure the house doesn't fall down, right? Make sure that there is a firm foundation. The slab is good. The slabs are good. The retaining walls are up. It's not going to fall down. I mean, regardless of what happens, shingles may fall off the house if something hits it. There may get cracks, but it's not going to fall down. And that's their job. And so that's most important, because at the end of the day, the family wants to be safe. The family wants to have confidence that this house is going to protect them and their family. Secondarily, the family wants to make sure the house looks cool, right? And so that's where our next individual comes in. And so we can call that our interior or exterior designer. So this individual is going to say, okay, from any perspective, from a feng shui perspective, or from any perspective, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to say what color the walls are. I'm going to see how the shrubbery looks on the outside. I'm going to say where we need to put wall art, where we need to put mirrors, and I am highly paid to do that because I have the expertise on the best experience. So when his family comes in, they're going to feel great. And so that was their job. And so even if they're not the ones actually putting the paintings on the walls, they are the ones to dictate where things go because that's their expertise. So the next individual that we're talking to is really what I call them our specialized carpenter. So there will be certain things like faucets, carpeting, tile, that you can just go to Home Depot and buy. There will be things such as special cabinets, maybe I use the word carpenter, we can call it contractor as well, maybe a pool on the outside that really is really special. A decking, another great example. They're the ones that's going to take the vision of the customer, the homeowner, and make it reality. And this is something you can't buy, you've got to make it custom. That's their job, and so they're very gifted in that regard. Now they're probably not going to, they may or may not hang it on the wall, but they'll produce it, and they'll allow people that want to install it, or they may install it as well. Okay, so among all of these individuals, we can and with some help, with some help with the team, we can get a house up, right? And so, but we don't really stop there because these aren't the only players, because what we have is we definitely have our homeowner. And the homeowner obviously is going to be the consumer of this house. They're going to be have the final say-so. And so let's assume that they like the house. They move in, or they like the house. The next step, what they have to do, is they have to actually move in. So they need to hire some movers. And so the interior designer has already said, this is where everything goes, right? This is how you should go. And the homeowner said, okay, I agree with that. So then they direct our movers to put things where they should go. Okay, so now the homeowner is there, moved in, they're feeling good. Well, they work for a living, so they really can't do a whole lot of maintenance around the house, so they have to hire some service people. And so they're service people, and this could be as much as, a foundation specialist, all the way down, to lawn, maid service, and maybe alarm ADT service. So that basically what they need is they need external folks to be able to look after their home and let them know when something goes wrong. And if something does go wrong, some folks actually come in and fix the problem. And so really these 7 roles really kind of encompass our house analogy. So what we're going to do now is talk about it in SharePoint. Let me change colors here. All right. So let's talk about a few things here. And let's talk about it from a SharePoint role perspective, what they know, tools they use in SharePoint, or what tools they use in this role. And now we're starting to get around the specifics of what we're most interested in. Okay, so if we look at our architect, in SharePoint speak, that's an architect as well. That's our SharePoint architect. So just like the architect's job here is to put the house together to meet the homeowner's specs and all the implications with that, with working with all of these roles, the SharePoint architect's job is to put the solution together. Now it may be that the solution is simply just out-of-the-box SharePoint stuff. But mostly, you're probably going to want 80% SharePoint out of the box, maybe 20% customizations, and then it could mean that you'll have these third-party tools that can come in that have other implications. And their job is to know about all of that, and to be able to say, this is going to impact this, when and where, so that they have the best solution for the client. Now, at a minimum, the architect needs to be able to play in all the areas, or have the knowledge of the other areas. Ideally, the architect will be able to roll up their sleeves and really play, and really execute in all the other areas. Now, that could be a hard, maybe a hard find, but those are our consultants that are extremely valued. I'm not one of those. So, not to sound glib, but what do they know? They know everything. And what tools do they use? They use all of them. But we'll see with the list as we build this out. Okay, so our structural engineer, the guy that makes sure that the slab is solid and the retaining walls are up, that's our infrastructure folks. So these are the guys that come in and they set up the servers. They make sure that it's solid, the security is good, given a certain amount of traffic, it's not going to go down, right? As pretty as a SharePoint site is, if it's down 50% of the time, it's not useful, the client is extremely unhappy, even if it does some cool stuff. So those are infrastructure guys. Not officially SharePoint infrastructure, but more and more we're going to be using these individuals to come in as our first pass at a project to make sure everything is solid. And so, what do they know? They know servers. They know server logs. They know how to troubleshoot. They know firewall issues. They know a lot. I mean, they know Active Directory. It's these individuals. Currently within our practice, this is Kenny. So that's the profile. So if you want to, I imagine if you want to find a really nice infrastructure resource, pull his resume. And what are the tools they use? Basically any of the server tools, right? Anything to manage the box to get them set up. They will understand how to set up SharePoint, so you can put SharePoint in there as well. But yeah, that's basically where they play. Okay, moving to the other side of the spectrum. With our designers, the interior exterior designers, this is what we call our SharePoint designer. So this individual is really the look and feel resource. So if you think of our Sling Rock group, they're the ones that create comps for websites and things like that. This SharePoint designer is just on the other side of them. They're the ones that really know your HTML. They really know your CSS. They probably have done Photoshop work, and they know layouts and branding. And they probably have worked on Apple machines a lot in the past. And so this is, they may be technical, they may be dev-worthy, but most likely they're very design-oriented. And what are the tools that they use? Well, there's a product called SharePoint Designer. I notice my penmanship is getting really heinous at this point. But there are two SharePoint Designer products, one 2007, one 2010. It's something small. I don't think it'll impact from a sourcing perspective, but SharePoint 2007 can only be used in 2007 in MOS, and SharePoint 2010 can only be used to manage SharePoint 2010. But this is the tool you would use to take the comp from SlingRock and then translate it into something that SharePoint can consume. So the branding and the layouts and all of that, they would need to have that ability. So there is a bit of technical knowledge there. So it's not just look and feel layouts, but it's not going as far as code. Where we do go as far as code is the concept of this specialized carpenter. Here's our SharePoint developer. And the important thing to remember here is this example. Because the developer's primary role is to create components that then that do not currently exist, that we can then put into our SharePoint environment to provide a certain level of functionality. And so that's really what their job is. And so that they need to know really how SharePoint works from the guts, inside and out, because they need to understand how what they're writing impacts the system. But these are in the form of web parts. They're in the form of possibly custom components that are on the back end. But at the end, it's pieces of functionality, quick hit pieces of functionality. They're not developing things from the ground up, typically because the SharePoint platform allows you to build on top of. So that's their role. So what do they know? These are the things that we typically think of. Our C Sharps, our VB Nets, our Visual Studio. They also know PowerShell, which is a scripting language that allows you to automate certain operations within SharePoint. They may know Silverlight, although Silverlight is really a design aspect, but it involves development. So once again, if this designer is dev worthy, they may know. They may ramp up on Silverlight, but if not, it would fall to our SharePoint developer role. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other things here, but that's the key. They're knee deep in code. They're the ones that are writing it, developing it, and deploying it. And so they're also responsible for deployment, for code deployment. And I'll just throw in Team Foundation Server as well. So these are our techies. Now, so as you can see, this individual and this individual are most likely very different. This individual's been, in Visual Studio most of their life, and they may or may not care, but most likely wouldn't care about what things look like, as long as it works. This individual really cares about what things look like. On pain of death, it needs to look good. In between these two roles, and this guy or gal works in Visual Studio, mostly. In between these two roles, there is a skill set that may bleed either way. And that's the concept of XML, XSL. So within SharePoint, in order to get certain things to look a certain way and to be able to manipulate things, without going to Visual Studio, the technologies of XML and XSL are used incessantly. So an example of that is if you wanted to, say you had a list of documents, maybe they have some different categories, and you wanted them to display a certain way through a roll-up, and there's a web part that allows you to roll up a list of documents. Well, if you wanted to look a certain way, and you wanted to change the way it looks, most likely you wouldn't go to Visual Studio, but you would have to go into the XSL behind that to make that change. So I don't want to go too deep in the weeds there, but the point is that if our SharePoint designer is the individual that works mainly in SharePoint Designer, and they're very well skilled in XML and XSL, that's a much higher caliber resource than if they just were the look and feel. And then obviously the thing that I'll come back to is then if they can bleed either way, to designer or to developer, then they're really a high caliber resource. Okay, so then finally, and I say finally because I'll talk about this here in a second, these will be typically client roles, and this will be typically consultant roles. So our final consultant role I want to talk about is the concept of a SharePoint admin. Now the SharePoint admin is much like our group of service individuals in our house example. And the reason is the SharePoint admin really comes in once the environment has been built up. So it's been built up, it's good, the client has signed off. Now they need to manage it. Now, this may take and so just like with our house example where you may have structural issues like a foundation specialist or just aesthetic issues like a lawn made or security issues or managing security such as alarm servicing. The SharePoint admin is really the corporation's central point of contact for if things need to be changed slightly or just maintained. So in our typical consulting projects, this role really is ultimately an internal role. The client typically takes this role as the organization's central point of contact. Sometimes, though, the organization says, we don't feel comfortable here. So that's where managed services come in. And managed services manages all of this so that they have access into the system, and so when something needs to be changed, updated, questions, logs need to be looked at, they take over. And in very few situations, they'll actually have a consultant on staff to do this. I personally was that consultant for a couple years at AMD. And your job is to field questions and field requests. And you may have to go as far across as a layout change and as far deep as something with the server and looking at logs. So this is very much a cross-sectional kind of role. And with our managed services, the beautiful thing there is they do bleed into these different areas. They're very highly skilled. But most times within an organization, the individual taking over this role will not be. So there's opportunity there. That's why the managed services provides us that opportunity. And so really, what do they know? They do know a little bit of everything. But really, they really know how to configure the heck out of SharePoint. At the bare minimum, they're going to know how to bin SharePoint and from a configuration perspective. And they're going to know security. They're going to know all that has to do with configuration. The tool they use is primarily, from a configuration perspective, the browser. But specifically, there's a tool within SharePoint called Central Administration. Central Admin for short. And this is really where you go in and configure behind the scenes SharePoint. And so that's important. So if we're looking at admins, they should know Central Admin backwards and forwards. Okay, so now we have a couple client roles. So why bring this up? Well, it does matter, especially as we're looking at different resources with different abilities and backgrounds. So our homeowner is simply an end user. I mean, that's the person. That may not even be our actual client per se, but this is going to be the end consumer of our product. And, we assume they know nothing. Because it's so easy to use. And the tool they use, it's just the browser, because it's a SharePoint product. And then finally, our movers. They're the ones putting things on the walls. So these are our content managers. So in the SharePoint world, these are the ones creating pages, putting web parts on pages, putting pictures in pages. I mean, these are the ones that they know they're an advanced user. You can call them a power user, but they're the ones actually building out the pages within a site. They're probably not going to be creating new sites. That's going to fall to the admin. But once the admin creates the sites, they're going to make it their own, make it the home that they should. And what do they know? They know about content management. Once again, not to be glib, but they know all of the things about what looks good, where things should go. They really know from a content perspective how things should be said and the feel of their department or their corporation. But they're still only using a browser because it's SharePoint. They may dabble in Photoshop if they're that gifted, but they don't necessarily need to. Why do we care about the content managers? Well, because during typical SharePoint projects, there is, especially during an intranet or an intranet deployment, there is a decently large content migration effort. And it may be a very simple content migration effort, a very large one. And typically our consultants are tasked with managing that effort with the client content managers. So the reason I bring this up is, if we're on the fence and one has managed large content migration efforts and one has not, I'd probably err on the side of this, because this is a people issue versus the technical issue we can train up. It's the people issues that we obviously have more challenges with. But that's basically it. These are the primary roles that we use within the SharePoint practice and when we do SharePoint projects. Now these are just roles. These aren't necessarily titles. These aren't individual people. Just the contrary, just like how the architect needs to know and play anywhere within the stack, the more multiple roles we can get with the same person, the better. Because you're really going to, because if you're only a developer, then we need to bring someone in that can be a designer to build that out. But if you can play both of these roles, at least, maybe with conjunction with SlingRock to actually get the creative, that's so much better. And then, of course, your admin as well. So if you can play 2 or 3 of these roles, well, from this point up, then that's really valuable. But any of these roles are definitely valuable. So, and that's basically all I got. I'm sure we can't read that, but these are the major roles, and so I'm gonna stop there. And I don't know if is that helpful.